to not wear the same shirt, because that would be very weird if I was wearing the same shirt as I did on the slide. So this is the last talk of the day. So either you all don't have a ride to the bar, or you're really interested in hearing about this. So I'll take either one, I guess. Either one is a win. So hello, my name is Damian. I currently work for a company called Platform 9. We do sell an OpenStack compliant cloud, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here as a former VMware admin who made the jump into the OpenStack world, and I'm hoping that some of the things that I learned will be helpful to you all. So I guess first question, who here runs VMware now and is looking to move to OpenStack soon? Okay, well, cool. Y'all are in the right place. Thank you for not going to the bar. So a little bit about me. This is just kind of my experience, right? I built my career around VMware. I joined the site formerly known as Twitter around 2010. There was a really great community there. Folks that I met, that I went to conferences with, that I studied for certifications alongside. I worked around and for VMware. And what happened is, you know, what happened. But this is a new day, and we can all move forward. I do want to say that if I do say something that is maybe politically incorrect from a vendor perspective, that's my opinion. That's not the company's. So why are organizations migrating? Well, there's a lot of reasons, really. But basically, it comes down to Broadcom wants money. And it seems to be working for them. I got some stock after the VMware acquisition closed and I was laid off. And that stock is worth over 3.5 times what it was then, which is crazy. I mean, I don't know of any other stock that would triple in nearly 2 years. But the downside of that is Broadcom has left their community. They've left people who are learning about VMware in the community, or like in early career college folks. They've turned their back on their community. They've turned their back on their channel partners, and they've turned their back on their customers. And it sucks. It's not fun. Everyone is wondering, what do we do now? My friends at Nutanix and at Red Hat, they all say that business is booming because everyone wants away from VMware, right? Broadcom has shown who they are, and even if they say they've changed their policy due to negative backlash today, we already know where they want to go, so why trust them further? But this isn't really about that. This is about understanding what you face as a VMware practitioner moving into that OpenStack world. And so there's 3 big changes, right? There's the technical side, understanding what the hell is a keystone. You know, I don't understand why I have to do it this way. What is an ephemeral VM, right? There's the operational side of things, which is how do I do my job, right? Like, this is technology that that I have to learn at whatever point I'm at in my life, and that's a big thing to accept. No one likes change. And then there's the cultural side of things from an organizational perspective. How does your company adapt? How do you adapt as a person, right? I've been through some life changes where I've been like, I'm in my 40s now. Who am I in my 40s that deals with this life change, right? This is the same thing. This is a big upheaval. But I just want you all to know that you can get through it. So first off is the technology. I put the little wait Linux really thing there. That's a thing that I hear from VMware administrators when they look at OpenStack. They're like, I'm used to clicking through things. I'm not used to looking at a command line. And that's okay. I use Mac and OS and Linux interchangeably in my job. Not everyone likes to do that, and that's fine. But there is going to be an adaptation to the technology needed. So there's architectural and management differences, right? vSphere and vCenter are very monolithic. You've got a lot of that GUI-centric ClickOps management. VMs are a concrete set of files. If you look at the underlying VM, there's the VMDK and the VMX and et cetera, et cetera. Those are all things. VMs on the OpenStack side are more abstract. There's, of course, a different hypervisor. ESXi is Linux underneath, but it's a very specialized version of Linux. There is management of VM and containers if you were a Tanzu customer as well. But moving from that over to VMware, there's kind of a translation needed, right? Whereas VMware called everything VMware something, VMware DRS, VMware HA, VMware FT, right? We call it Keystone, Nova, Cinder, Glance, blah, blah, blah. You can actually kind of see a little bit of the change from the OpenStack documentation and foundation perspective, where they will talk about OpenStack Compute or OpenStack Identity instead of those underlying project names. But as someone who had to learn this when I started at Platform 9 this January, knowing nothing about OpenStack, it actually is pretty easy once you're open your mind to it and once you understand that there is a difference between an open source project where you've got sub-projects within it and something that's sold as a single stack from a single vendor. OpenStack is very API first. It's very CLI first. If you look at the underlying user interface or even how the Python command line tools work, they all hit the same API. They all go through the identity service to make sure that you're allowed to do the thing before the thing is done. As I mentioned before about VMs, they are more abstract. The actual VM lives in memory, right? Like if you were to recover an OpenStack VM, it's not as easy as scanning a LUN and importing the VM files like you could with vCenter, because you may have storage stored on a Cinder service, which is block storage. The actual rest of the metadata could be stored in a database. And so it is more complicated. And then even the management of VMs is a much different approach than what you have with OpenStack, but there is more flexibility. Are there any questions about that before I move forward? All right. So there's networking and storage differences. I'm only really talking about the vSwitch and DV-switch level, right? But if you all think back to how a port group works, VMware doesn't really care if those VMs can talk to each other. That's really your business to make sure that it's IP addressed and it's on the same network, right? It's just kind of a dumb switch to some degree. The DV switches are a little bit more complicated, but you know, the point is VMware doesn't really care, whereas OpenStack is much more prescriptive. The IP, the MAC address, and the security group, those are all assigned at the port level. So that's not necessarily like the identity of that VM anymore. That's the identity of that port. VMs can have persistent or ephemeral storage. Ephemeral means it goes away and it never comes back. Persistent means it sticks around, right? Volumes can be attached to VMs, they can be detached, they can be snapshot independently and moved around and booted from a volume snapshot. The storage differences are different, of course. You've got VMFS, which everyone knows. vSAN is a big thing that a lot of folks that I've heard who run vSAN now are wondering, what's the OpenStack equivalent of vSAN? Ceph, I guess, is probably the closest and best answer, but also Ceph is an open source product and it can be fiddlier than what you would like. vVols, of course, there is an equivalent to vVols, especially if we're talking about the Cinder side of things. Cinder, which handles block storage, has drivers that are specific for each storage vendor, and so you will have a host that talks at the API, the control plane level, to that storage backend, and it says storage backend, make me a volume, etc. So there is a separation between the data plane and the control plane with Cinder, which is something that vVols did while vVols still existed. And then, of course, we've got Glance for image storage, that is operating system images or virtual machine backups or volume snapshots, etc. That would be stored on Glance. And then Swift would be your S3 object equivalent. Come on in, y'all. All right, so identity, security, and business continuity. I recognize that I only had 30 minutes for this, and you could spend at least 47 hours talking about those things specifically. So this is kind of a hodgepodge of various things on this slide. But I will say, if we're thinking about how VMware handled role-based access control, VMware is great at very granular role-based access control within vCenter and handling centralized SSO for access to those VMware resources. OpenStack uses Keystone, which is the identity service. It's multi-tenant. It has federated identity. It is extremely flexible. It is not always something that is fully exposed within a user interface. You may have to manage Keystone through a CLI or through an API. VMware does and did data encryption at rest and in flight, and Barbican is the secrets manager on OpenStack that actually kind of holds your encrypted things. And Barbican is available to encrypt your data at rest and in flight. VMware has an extensive backup and DR ecosystem. When I worked for VMware, I was working in the office of the CTO, and I had responsibility for overseeing the Dell backup relationship with VMware from an engineering perspective. VMware never really cared about backup that much, honestly, because they had a difficult time figuring out how to monetize it, right? They sold vSphere, they couldn't really figure out how to make more money, even though there were much better backup options out there. So they have the extensive backup and DR ecosystem. They've got Veeam and Zerto and Commvault and Rubrik and Cohesity. OpenStack does have backup providers. I just met with Pavel from Storeware. I hadn't really seen Storeware in action before, and I was really impressed by it. But frankly, there is limited backup in DR options for VMs. I do know that Rubrik and Cohesity are working on their OpenStack support. Veeam, I don't believe, has quite fully decided that they're ready to embrace OpenStack because they're waiting to hear more from their customers that that's something that they want. But that's really a big deal to think about is, how do you move your backup ecosystem from one provider to the other while maintaining continuity of your backups, right? Like that's not something you just do. The concrete VMs do make DR a lot easier. You can back up a single LUN and it has all your VMs on it. I meant to mention earlier, but I didn't, that Cinder actually treats attached volumes as an individual LUN. So you can't just give it a couple terabytes and land a bunch of VMs on it. Cinder wants a volume or a LUN per volume. So that's something that you really have to think about from a technical perspective and how you would handle that operationally. VMware is an integrated risk model. It's the one throat to choke, kind of concept. OpenStack is more distributed. There's far more complexity and far more flexibility with OpenStack, and so the risk model is different, and that's something to think about as you're moving towards or away from VMware towards OpenStack. And then operationally is different. Problems that were once confined to the hypervisor are now systemic. They cross an API, the database, messaging boundaries. There's internal messaging that OpenStack does to make sure that all of the various pieces and parts can talk to each other. And that needs distributed ownership and cross-functional triage teams that may not exist if you are working in a somewhat siloed VMware infrastructure. Monitoring goes from ARIA or vRealize or whatever collection of various things you have there over to more of an open source perspective. You've got your Prometheus and your Grafana and your Elastic Stack, et cetera. Updates are also quite different, whereas VMware did a pretty great job at working with hardware vendors at making sure that you could not only update the VMware specific stuff that was running on your hardware, but also update your operating systems, et cetera, and also update your VMware. OpenStack is different. The way that it releases is different. It's semi-annual, it's component-based, not necessarily everything that is in kind of the core of OpenStack would be updated for each major release. And so there's going to need to be a concept of blue-green or canary regions where you try to figure out, like, will this update break how we do things? And that takes more work. VMware is more of a managed service model, I think. It's been years since I've been a VMware administrator, but back then, and from what I hear even now, a lot of folks are just kind of deploying workloads based on business need, whether it's change requests or even catalog items. The fancier organizations have, kind of a self-service thing built in, whether that's integrated through ServiceNow or something else. OpenStack takes self-service from the very beginning. It is all multi-tenant all the time, and it is all because of Keystone. But you can do self-service provisioning of API and CLI or through Horizon, which, if your organization is inclined to do so, gives you the ability to delegate that daily administrative work to your more technically inclined end users who can handle that self-service and still be able to obey all of your quotas and leases and things like that you may have set up. But nevertheless, there's a lot to take in and there's a lot to think about, right? If we're thinking about automation and orchestration, of course, there was always Orchestrator, which was a fantastic product that was woefully unused for a long time. PowerCLI, loved PowerCLI. I still love PowerShell. It's wacky to me that I can run PowerShell on macOS, but that's a different story. But most of those APIs and SDKs layered over VMware products. And if you were thinking about the actual automation of the VMs themselves, we had vApps, we had OVA and OVF, which was fancy zip files, and some GUI-based templates. But there wasn't a whole lot of really full stack orchestration of VMs, right? Like infrastructure as code was more difficult to do with VMware than it is to do with OpenStack. And so the benefit of more of the open automation orchestration approach that OpenStack brings is not paying for shelfware, right? I hear people complaining about VCF9 and they're like, why the hell do I have to buy the whole thing when I only want part of the thing? And the answer is because Broadcom wants money. The second answer is that there's a better thing out there for you, right? OpenStack is API first. It's modular. Each service can be automated through its own API. I've just recently did some automation work that was doing some post-configuration of an OpenStack install. And frankly, I thought it was fun to do things with Nova, the compute service, and Cinder, the storage service, and Keystone with creating users and setting permissions. I really enjoyed it, but that's just me. OpenStack also has broad open source community support. There is a lot of vendor-developed drivers and plugins for storage and network and identity. Not everything is vendor developed though. There's a lot of things that are open source, which means sometimes if it breaks, it's up to you to fix it if you care to do so, which is also a different thing that a lot of VMware folks may not have really thought about before, right? If it was broken, you call VMware, not file your own pull request on GitHub. But welcome to the new world. And then to that point, governance and support is quite different, right? With VMware, it was top-down, it was commercial support only. You had to talk to VMware or a VMware support partner. Everything was tightly integrated with VMware because there was a lot of VMware and vendor validation, which meant there was a lot of adherence to the hardware compatibility list and making sure that all of the firmware that you were running was on that HCL, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. OpenStack is not like that. It's a lot more flexible. You rely a lot more on driver-based frameworks. And so an example of that would be if you were a NetApp customer, you would need to make sure that NetApp's Cinder driver for NFS or any other block storage would actually have all the features and functionality that you might want in it. I know, for example, very specifically, live migration of NFS storage for VMs that are running on NetApp is something that NetApp has completed the code for, but upstream hasn't taken it up, right? And so, the point is it's not as tightly integrated as VMware was and continues to be. And then, of course, the licensing risk with VMware as well know is vendor audit, right? We've seen some of the things in the news about Broadcom going after customers. There are people who say, "Oh, I'll just keep running my stuff and we'll see what happens," and that is your risk, I guess. But the licensing risk with OpenStack is more about open source compliance and management and understanding what software it is you're consuming and what responsibilities you have in using that. I've been talking a lot. Are there any questions so far? All right. So lastly, culture. And unfortunately, I haven't seen any conference bingo cards this time. There's been some really great ones in past conferences, but I haven't seen one here. So that joke may fall flat. But anyways, there's a lot of... There's going to be a cultural difference going from VMware to OpenStack. And what I mean by culture is not the place where you were born or the place where you live now, but culture in terms of organizations, right? Culture in terms of understanding the new opportunities that are available to you. I was talking to one of the founders of my company very early on in talking with the company about it, working there, and his opinion was that Broadcom and doing what they've done is kind of the equivalent of a wildfire, right? And a wildfire clears out a lot of brush, it clears out a lot of the undergrowth, it makes room for new growth, right? And so if you think about it from that perspective, migrating from VMware is a growth opportunity. You have an opportunity for new skills, whether it be Linux administration, understanding APIs, infrastructure as code, distributed troubleshooting, and like log tracking through various places is something that one has to do, especially if you're doing things like debugging neutron networking. There are boot camps and training and certifications available. There is a certified OpenStack administrator that the foundation runs. Some vendors also have their own. I know that Red Hat does. I'm personally hoping to get a certification program started at Platform 9, but that's 2026's problem at this point. And there's also a lot of open source community and events and user groups. I live in Austin, Texas. There are Kubernetes days. There is the OpenStack days. Those folks are out there, and those folks are probably in the same place that you are, or they have been, or they will be. And so the point is that you're not alone. You can get there. It'll be fun with air quotes, but if it doesn't actually kill you, you'll be fine. So anyways, that was my talk. That's all that I had to say. I hope it was helpful. Thank you. Are there any questions? Sure. No, I know. You're right. I remember maybe 10 years ago, I was in Barcelona doing a VMware orchestrator boot camp, and one of the older gentlemen there was saying, WTF, what is this Linux? I'm a Windows guy, right? And people still say that. I talk to customers every day that they're Windows shops, and they're only Windows shops. And so there is going to be a difference between the administrator, right? The administrator may not necessarily care how much Broadcom costs, or how much it will cost in the future, or how their support may change if you're not buying enough from them, right? The administrator really cares about the day-to-day, keeping prod up and running, keeping people happy, making sure nothing is actually on fire. I don't know. I guess there's not really a single answer to that. I personally have really enjoyed moving to OpenStack and learning more about that. Just in my own personal life, I'd kind of gotten burned out and thought that I was dead to technology, and I learned that I was not. But there's so many different answers to why an administrator might want to go to OpenStack. I would say probably the biggest is the open foundation, right? Or the open fundamentals of OpenStack. You're no longer beholden to a single vendor, right? Your virtual machine disks are QCOW2, which work anywhere. instead of just being VMDK, right? So I would say the openness is probably the biggest point, but also admittedly some of the bigger risk. And so I guess I didn't come here to tell everyone that it was like all roses and happiness, but just to say, hey, you'll get through it. Sorry you're there. I had to be there too. Any other questions? I don't know if that answered your question, but okay. It is an answer, yes. Are there any other questions? Cool. Well, you guys can go have a drink now of water or coffee, whatever you'd like. Thank you for staying late. I appreciate it.